Archie's TV Laugh Out, issue 75. Sabrina wants to show a girl that she's not the best bowler here. She casts a spell on her thoughts saying to a demon tyke to make it strike. For no reason, she summons the bowling employees and they're on strike. She'd have to imagine that for it to happen. If she's literally asking some mystic spirit to cast the spell instead, why? Apparently that spirit had a sense of humor. It seems like almost every time these witches rely on a redundant mystic spirit for their spell, it screws up. And it's usually just the comedy page. Sabrina apologizes to Hilda when all she's doing is making a cup and saucer levitate. And Hilda says not again, and for no reason, the cup and saucer fall and break. Hilda says that's been happening too much, and Sabrina's spells are losing strength. So she decides to call Della to fix this arbitrary problem. Good thing she can just call up the witch president whenever she wants, and she's never busy doing something else. Della says that the reason she's losing power is that she's not using magic enough. So she encourages her to use it. You're lucky enough to be a witch, so act like one. I wish the animated series was like this. But I don't buy that she'd barely use magic. A pivotal part of her character is that she uses magic impulsively, which is realistic, as opposed to her ignoring her magic because all of her friends are normal. Della says that it's all of Sabrina's friends that are weird. This would make sense if most humans were witches, which she should explain. And that would make sense because there would be way more witches than non-witch humans since they'd be better at surviving and thriving. And while Sabrina could realistically be using her powers less to hide them, she can still erase memories to cover it up. But I suppose her reasoning is that she's embarrassed at getting discovered at all, and doesn't like freaking people out and having to erase memories at all. Della tells her to use her magic because she needs to recharge. That seems contradictory. You'd think she'd have to not use magic for it to recharge. And then Ambrose complains about someone zapping his shaving cream as there's too much of it. Sabrina apologizes and says that she had to do it. Well, Della wants her to use her magic for evil, but it'd make more sense for her character if she just zapped up a bunch of snacks to eat, because that wouldn't get Della mad at her or her family. She pours a cup of coffee while the cup is floating, and she says that she thought Della might like a cup of coffee. Then the coffee spills on Della's legs, which makes me worry about her punishing her. It's a little satisfying since Della's evil, but in this story I was on her side. How'd Sabrina do this by accident? Maybe she did it on purpose and assumed it'd be fine because she had faith that everyone would think it was an accident. Why didn't she say it was an accident? Wouldn't it be more in character for her to apologize? I'm thankful that, as I expected, Della somehow was merciful enough to not punish Sabrina for spilling hot coffee on her. She uses magic to put the dishes away. It makes no sense that she'd break the dishes, weaker magic or not. Why would she move these fragile dishes around when her spells are weaker? She tells Hilda she'll get her a chair, and Hilda just sits down and falls on the floor for no reason. Della tells Sabrina to stop, and she finally lampshades that Hilda should save her for help with the big stuff. The story ends with Ambrose thankfully not mad at her anymore, because he's proud of her for being good at abusing her magic, since he was raised to be. Hilda should have been the one saying this. It'd be more in character. This story was about Sabrina's spells being weaker and causing nothing but trouble for her family by accident. And it's somehow because she didn't use magic enough, which isn't explained when that seems out of character. So I just have to assume that it's because she's tired of people witnessing her magic. And while it's creative that this is why she had this problem, and that she somehow needs to use magic a lot to recharge it, it doesn't make any sense. Everything in the franchise besides this will, if anything, treat magic like a finite resource. If anything, I'd expect her spells to get weaker if she used too much of it. Instead, it's being portrayed like arm muscles, where if the arm isn't exercised enough, it'll get weak. But why would her magic battery be like a muscle? It's a battery. I didn't like seeing characters suffer because of the magic, when they didn't do anything in the story to deserve it. Archie's Joke Book 268. Sabrina feels bad for Harvey for having to shovel snow and uses magic to try to help him. It confused him, but it would be worth it. Then she hears him telling a girl over the phone that he'll pick her up after he shovels his walkway. Why was his window open in the winter so that she'd be able to hear him? So she uses magic to completely fill his walkway with snow. That'd make Della happy. And if he's really trying to date another girl, then she's only delaying the inevitable. Archie's Joke Book 269. Hilda says her feet are killing her and she can't walk another step, and somehow asks Sabrina how they're going to get home, which would only make sense of her if it was because Sabrina just insisted on them walking to get some exercise. They can just teleport home and you'd think she'd do that right away. Instead, Sabrina points out a golf driving range as the answer, which is creative. She gets some golf clubs, says that they don't need any golf balls to drive, and ends the story by flying with the golf club. And amuses me by saying, "Ta-ta!" instead of caring that she gave away magic. But nobody would believe him, and he's just one person, so it makes more sense that the witches wouldn't care about this. The earlier continuities make the sitcom's Witches' Council look too paranoid of mortals by comparison. Hilda tells Sabrina to clean her room, and Sabrina simply agrees without a fuss. Hilda says she wants to see that floor spotless when she comes back, so Sabrina uses magic to make that happen, and makes all of that stuff get stuck on the ceiling. And ends with her thinking she did a good job, rather than her doing this just to mess with Hilda. She should know that it's better to turn the things on the ceiling invisible so Hilda won't see them. She should see them herself pretty soon. If witches can do that, you'd think they'd all do that to have more space in their room. Then Sabrina gets shown a chart for some reason, and a guy says that as long as the cost of living keeps going up, they'll have inflation. Sabrina's concerned, casts a spell to make that line point down, and the chart falls to the right, confusing everybody. And she writes it in her good deed book, probably assuming that this actually decreased the cost of living. I liked that she has one, because it makes sense for her and would make her happy. Archie's TV Laugh Out, issue 76. Hilda facepalms at seeing a drink being poured over food on the table and tells Sabrina that she should remember to turn off her spells. She arbitrarily complains about a bottle of syrup being wasted, even though one of them should realize they could just use magic to restore all the syrup immediately. Sabrina apologizes and fortunately explains that the phone rang and Harvey made her forget. Hilda wastes a lot of time nagging her about her forgetfulness and warns her that when she's love-struck, she's stupid. I wonder if this is foreshadowing. Sabrina says it's cold and she should have worn a hat. She says she'll use magic to conjure one up from her closet. Harvey startles her from behind and the hat falls on her head, making him scream. I still prefer thinking to use magic and doing so to her not thinking to use it. How was she supposed to know someone would see it? But still, you'd think the hat would appear actually on her head instead of having to fall onto it. Because this way, it'd have to fall onto it extremely accurately. Harvey thinks he couldn't have seen what he saw and says he can't stay because he's running an errand. He's probably too scared from seeing that to feel like saying what he's doing. Sabrina thinks she shouldn't have picked this hat because she's allergic to its fur. I guess she picked it up from memory. But it wasn't love that made her not remember that. She decides to send it back and zap up her wool hat. And Harvey comes back to ask for the time or something and sees hats hovering over her head. Our time is wasted by too many panels of tension where Sabrina's scared. Why would he say her name looking angry just to say he has to see his doctor? Him saying her name like this would only make sense if he already knew she was a witch and was just saying this to call her out on the fact that she made magic too obvious and scared him, and made it harder to hide the fact they knew. Why would he bother saying her name if he thought it was a hallucination? I guess by the time she started talking in the end panel, he was already too far away to hear her call herself a witch. I think the reason she decided to face the music instead of just erase his memory of magic is that she always wanted to be honest with him anyways, and was hoping that his reaction wouldn't be too bad, so that she wouldn't have to keep lying to him, and wanted to give him a chance. It's confusing that she was too scared to think to erase his memory. I guess it makes sense that she was calm about doing it in a different story, because there, she knew ahead of time what magical event Harvey was going to witness. so she already planned on erasing his memory. When she's surprised, she's trapped in the moment. This story was about Harvey witnessing Sabrina's magic twice and then wanting to see a doctor, and him witnessing magic is nothing new. So the interesting things about the story were that she revealed she was allergic to fur and forgot it, which was foreshadowed because Hilda called her forgetful, and so she had to zap up another hat. I don't see why the hat would even be floating over her head and therefore be in the air long enough to be witnessed in the first place, because she would just imagine the hat being worn by her. If a hat fell on her head, she'd still have to put it on. It was interesting that she spilled syrup because she forgot to turn off the syrup pouring spell. It makes sense that she'd think the syrup container was so heavy that she'd rather pour it telekinetically. Archie's joke book 270. Sabrina sees someone she knows near a wishing well and bets that she's wishing for money. She casts a spell asking the spirits to grant her wish and make it 10 times larger than she's wishing for. Even if she did wish for money, that obviously caused her to get gigantic looking dollar bills that she wouldn't be able to spend. Instead, she gets giant roller skates in a twist. Sabrina sees a kid wish for a big shake outside, and she casts a spell for it, and for no reason he gets a handshake by a weird gas monster. It is funny that she casually walks away, but there's no reason she'd do this because she wouldn't have imagined that. I assume she stopped as soon as she heard him. Then Harvey wishes they could get some matches while at a tennis court, so Sabrina casts a spell and it gets confused at seeing some literal matches, and she puts it down on her good deed book, oblivious. Archie's TV Laugh-Out, issue 77. Sabrina wakes up in the morning with messy hair and complains that rain's being blown through her window. She uses magic to close it, the alarm clock rings, and she uses magic to get rid of the alarm clock. I hope this isn't another plot that punishes Sabrina for overusing magic by making her run out, because I'm finding all this magic entertaining, and most people would do this if they had magic. She teleports to the shower and says she's glad she has powers, because she was too tired to feel like walking there. Then she uses magic to make the towels dry her, and probably uses magic to get dressed too. Sabrina wonders what to have for breakfast while Hilda looks like she's making some. Instead of asking Hilda to create some pancakes, cereal, and coffee for her to save on magic, she does it herself. Hilda wonders if Sabrina could eat all of that by herself. For some reason, Sabrina says sarcasm doesn't fit Hilda, even though that's her character. Hilda tells her to dust and take the garbage out, so Sabrina does it with magic, and Hilda tells her she should at least make it look like she's carrying the garbage, worrying about what the neighbors would think if they saw her levitating a surprisingly small thing near her. Normally, Hilda wants to freak mortals out, and wouldn't care what they think. She then goes to the supermarket and uses magic there in front of people to get the stuff into the cart, being surprisingly reckless by using it in a public place. But this is a series where immortals see magic all the time, and yet they never all find out about witches and bother Sabrina, so there has to be witches spying on the witches to make mortals forget magic. Or maybe it's just as simple as no one believes anyone who sees it. Sabrina uses magic, still feeling tired as she sends things out of the shelves above her. I know the story is portraying her as lazy for this, but she's still putting in the effort of imagining stuff happening. And this is a welcome break after reading the 2000s comic. Sabrina says she's been neglecting knitting a sweater for Harvey, and she uses magic, wanting to get it done in time for his birthday. This contradicts one of the Sabrina Christmas magic stories where she learned that it felt better to knit socks for Jughead by hand. What's the point of using magic to do the knitting if it's still gonna take just as long? Harvey shows up at her door. He says they could go bowling or play tennis or watch a movie. And Sabrina says she wants to watch a movie because everything else sounds too exhausting. The story ends with her complaining that she's been overworking since she got up. I'm pleasantly surprised that the writer wasn't spiteful enough to make her run out of magic or get punished for overusing it. I guess the punishment was supposed to be that she's tired at the end of the story. There's been stories where Hilda or Sabrina gets tired because she used too much magic, so that actually follows one of the rules of the series. I just wish it was outright explained that magic overuse is why she got tired, because it's confusing otherwise, since she did almost no physical activity all day. This story was about Sabrina using magic all day for various mundane activities. And surprisingly, it doesn't end up having her run out of magic or get punished for it. Instead, the worst it does is portray her as lazy and ends off with her being too tired to do physical activity. So I have to assume magic wore out. That's good enough of a punishment for me, but I wish Hilda said that happened, so that it feels like the story had a point to it. It was interesting seeing her use magic for all those things. If nothing bad ever happens to her, you could get jealous of her because of this. If I had to pick something I didn't like, it was that Hilda was annoyed with her at the end for being exhausted. You'd think that Hilda would be overusing magic just as much as her because she's a proud witch who said in the 70s comic that you'll get rusty if you don't use magic enough. Hilda is portrayed as annoyed with her just because that's what you'd expect of a normal parental figure. Sabrina was still putting in the effort of imagining scenes unfolding with motion over and over to cast her spells. And that could be difficult for someone with a bad attention span, who's easily bored. Archie's Joke Book 273. Sabrina complains that she hasn't seen any boys on the beach, asks for help from a genie, and he summons the wrong kind of boy, which might be justified because he just thinks of the word boy as being used to mean child. Then Sabrina is told by her madhouse rival Rosalind that 3 is a crowd with no provoking. So she teleports her away for being rude, and there's a happy ending as she shows affection to Harvey, which is good because to have a story really feel lighthearted, you have to let the likable main character get away with some things. It's an interesting surprise that Rosalind showed up again, and in the same story as Harvey.